Good afternoon. My name is Kendra, and I will be your conference operator today. At this time, I would like to welcome everyone to the NSP Closeout webinar. All lines have been placed on a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct an interactive question-and-answer session. If you would like to ask a question during that time, simply press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a tone acknowledging your request and a prompt to record your name. If you would like to withdraw your question, please press star, then the number 2. I would now like to turn the call over to your host, Jennifer Alpha. You may begin.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. This is the NSP Closeout webinar on special topics and post-closeout considerations. I'm here today with Mary Plowman and Kathy Kaminsky. We're all from TDA. And of course, we've got the NSP crew, David Nagara, John Laswick, and Hunter Kurtz. So this webinar is just one piece in a series of opportunities to learn about the closeout process. There's been a few resources that have preceded this webinar, and we just wanted to run through those today. On February 11th, HUD released the Closeout Instructions Notice. And on the 25th, there was a webinar to review the closeout steps. So if you weren't available for that webinar, you might want to go back and take a look at that to really understand the steps of closeout. And then just last week, HUD released the Closeout Guide, which is a sort of supplement to the notice, and it walks people through the different steps of closeout, as well as some tips on closeout examples, and things like that. And we did a webinar on that same day going over some information that grantees might use to begin the preparation of closeout and getting ready to start the process. Today's webinar is going to drill a little deeper into some special topics and get into some details on post-closeout issues. But coming up in the future, there'll be a lot more guidance on the closeout process, including a webinar on May 20th, which will focus on the QPR. As I mentioned, the Closeout Guide was released on April 20th, and that document does supplement the Closeout Notices. The webinar that you'll hear today actually draws a lot of information from the Closeout Guide, but if you'd like more detail on any of the topics we talk about here today, you might want to take a look at the guide because you'll find more information there. There's a lot more examples, tips, and clarifications, as well as annotated versions of some of the closeout forms. The appendix of the Closeout Guide actually has a lot of really useful information that grantees will use as they work through the closeout process. Now, this Closeout Guide is a living document, and it will be updated through addendums over time, as well as additional guidance such as webinars like these. So for today's agenda, we're going to talk about some strategies for spending down your line of credit. As you know, you'll need to spend down that line of credit before you can begin the closeout process. We'll also talk about some post-closeout considerations, including program income, land banks, and reporting. Then we'll move on to cover some topics that are really unique to just NSP2 and 3 grantees, as well as some considerations that state grantees need to make. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Plowman, and she'll get us started on our first topic.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm going to talk briefly about strategies for spending down your line of credit. As you know, one of the key things that you have to do before you close out either NSP1, 2, or 3 is basically spend the money that's in your line of credit, or accept the fact that if you have money left when you close out, the money will be taken back by the Treasury. So HUD would like you to get as close as possible. Rounding errors allowed, so let's just say you are down to your last $5. Nobody's asking you to struggle to get there. So we really just want to open up a dialogue about what can you do to get that money down from the Treasury and spent so that you can close out. So that's the first criteria. Then you know, of course, you have to meet a national objective. You know that you have to meet the 25% requirement in the set-aside dollars for low and moderate income individuals, that you have spent and completed those projects where you have incurred expenditures with federal dollars, and that you meet all of the other regulatory requirements. But the one we really want to talk about today is the issue that for so many grantees, because you were fortunate enough to have set up your program, to create program income, you've got money that you have to spend before you can actually go back to your line of credit. So as you all know, one of the suggestions has been folks using revolving loan funds. So what's a revolving loan fund? Essentially, it's a fund that you set up that helps you carry out a specific activity, whether it's acquisition rehab or rehab-only fund. You're essentially taking an amount of money, whatever you decide is necessary, pulling it down, putting it into a special bank account, and using those dollars to fund that specific activity. Now, what you can do, and one of the reasons we're talking about this is because we really want you to use up your program income. So you've got $500,000 in program income. You know that if you can't get that spent and moved, you can't get back to the Treasury. So take your program income, put it in a special revolving loan fund. That zeroes you down so that your next activity is up and your next bills can be spent out of the Treasury dollars. Now, you can set up separate revolving loan funds. So particularly, I think, for the states who many of them do have quite a bit of program income in their accounts right now and may have significant dollars left in their line of credit, think about if you know that you're going to be funding in 6 areas of your state, setting up separate revolving loan funds for each. It might give you an opportunity to use up more of your program income as it comes back in. So think about the different ways you want to do it, particularly if you have already made determinations about how you're going to disperse your program income back to some of the grantees in your state. So why are we suggesting this? Because you've got to get those line of credit funds spent. You know, like everybody knows, I'm sure, program income must be spent in advance of your line of credit. So the only way to get that program income cleared out without spending it on the regular invoices that are coming in to be spent is to set up a revolving loan fund. You can't capitalize the revolving loan fund with your line of credit funds, except that there are some limited exceptions. We can certainly talk about those if someone has an interest, and you can ask some questions of the HUD folks. But typically, what we have seen people do and have worked with some of the grantees on is setting up a revolving loan fund with your program income. So, tips to design it. Select an appropriate number of activities. You can't be all things to all people. What you're looking for when you're setting up the revolving loan fund is a revolving loan fund, say, for acquisition and rehab. And you should by now have a good sense of the kind of money that you'll be spending over time. So if you have $500,000 and you know that you can use that within a certain period of time, put $500,000 from your program income into your revolving loan fund and then use it from there. So size the revolving loan fund to your size and scope. I mean, clearly if you're California, you know that you're typically spending several $100,000 on properties that you acquire in rehab. If you're the state of West Virginia, it's a little different. So as you start to think about this, think about how much money you would realistically use over a specific period of time. And once again, remember, no time limits here. Think about, as I said earlier, target areas. If you know that when you go back out to disperse your program income because you've been receiving it and you will be going back to some of the same grantees that you've given money to in your state, think about setting it up that way. If you are a state grantee that's running the program from your capital, think about just setting up the revolving loan fund for County A, revolving loan fund for County B. So this is one way that you can, if you are able to do it, want to do it, you can move that program income out of your way so that you can get back to your line of credit and finally get it down to zero.
Mary, this is John.
Got it.
Hi. So just a couple of, issues related to that. One is, again, that there is currently no deadline, and no deadline in the foreseeable future. So there isn't any rush to do this, but I mean, you certainly, may want to keep your program moving and so forth. And I just did a quick analysis, and out of 307 NSP1 grantees, 57 still have more than $1 million in their line of credit. On the other hand, 75 have effectively zero in their lines of credit. So you kind of get the full range. And NSP2, 17 have more than $1 million in their lines of credit. So, some of those things don't lend themselves to revolving funds, and if that's the case, you shouldn't really, worry about it too much. You just have to kind of work your way through your program income as best you can.
And we did reference here that there has already been one policy alert on revolving loan funds, so we encourage you to take a look at it. But it is one way to start moving money if you have a desire to want to close out your NSP1 grant in particular, maybe 2 or 3. But like John said, since there's no deadline, you don't have to hurry to do this. So let me stop here and ask if there's questions on this part before we move on to some of the post-closeout issues. I don't see any written ones. And Kathy, do you know if there's anybody on the line?
Kendra, has anybody queued up to ask a verbal question?
As a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, please press star, then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a tone acknowledging your request and a prompt to record your name.
Well,
I have one question that just came in on the chat here, and Lois asks, can you explain income generating activity?
Sure, it's like the sale of a home that you assisted with NSP funds.
Or repayment of a loan for a second mortgage.
And if someone leaves the program and sells the property, the money comes back to the program.
As program income.
Correct. There's actually, correct me if I'm wrong, John, there are a number of grantees who set up their programs so that loan payments came back in, sales proceeds came back from subrecipients. So quite a few of the grantees have generated a lot of income.
Right. Well, I mean, if everybody passed their 100% expenditure deadline for NSP1 and there's still 57 communities, 57 grantees with more than $1 million, that's all program income.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Well, we have a phone question from the line of John Ebert.
Yes, I'm curious what the deadline might be for the NSP1 grantees spending down the line of credit?
At this point, there is no deadline.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Well, let me move the ball to Jennifer. She can pick up with other topics.
I have one more question, Mary, before you get to that. So Debbie asked, we have around $65,000 in program income and about $100,000 in the line of credit, and they're really at a loss as what to do with those funds. Not really a question, more of a statement, but maybe looking for ideas.
Okay, well, one thing that I could suggest generically, but it's almost always helpful, is technical assistance. So you could sign up for some free technical assistance and have somebody come out and evaluate your program and maybe help you think through some alternatives, a different way to, adjust the program structure or the target area or any number of things that you might have under your control. There are some markets where it's really kind of hard to do anything because the prices have gone back up and the grantees are left with relatively little money. I mean, I don't think, that's true in California mostly, but, it is possible that you'd be sort of frozen, I guess you might call it, and in that case, you might want to think about I mean, you could return the funds. I don't think we'd want to encourage you to do that, but I mean, that's your kind of worst case scenario. But I think that with some of the technical assistance providers we've had that have been working with the program all along, they've seen some things that, you know, maybe they can help you figure out, well, what would be a different way to spend this money, or maybe there's a new activity. Maybe you need to actually do some demolition, or you know, depending on the program year, maybe if it's NSP1, maybe you could spend it on some public facilities, for example. So, so there may be other things that you just haven't thought about, and I would, you know, talk to your field office and see if they have any ideas. A lot of this stuff is market-driven, and you can't really control that, but I think you can adjust to that.
John, here's an interesting question from Tom. We have received $86,000 in program income from the sale of a property funded with NSP1 funds. We no longer have an active NSP program. Can we use the program income for any CDBG eligible activity, or does it have to be used specifically for NSP1 activities?
Well, it has to be used for NSP activities. And actually, but, you know, since it's NSP1, it's a little better than if it were NSP3, because you can still do some public facilities and improvements. And so, you know, maybe there's a way to, you know, let's say you've got a neighborhood where you've done a couple of houses and there's some, you know, broken up sidewalk, or, you know, something like that, you know, that maybe you could replace. So you may have some options outside of just fixing up houses, but for all program income, it's going to stay NSP for as long as you have it, basically. But, you know, I mean, we're sort of promoting that as good news, because that means you can go up to 120% of median on some projects. You can do new construction. So you don't necessarily have to use it right away. You could take that, and we'll talk about this later, you can carry that program income to the other side of closeout and, you know, wait till you get a good project.
Okay. One more question. If we establish a revolving loan fund for land banking and the acquisition rehab with program income, will we be able to set up an account for administration? How can we keep a portion of our dollars for administration?
We're working on that. We think that you will be able to take your sort of capacity, carry some capacity forward. I'm not sure about program income earned after closeout, but if you've spent less than 10% of your original grant amount plus program income before closeout, you still have some budget capacity, so to speak, and we believe that you're going to be able to carry that beyond the closeout, and that's really appropriate, because you're going to have some administrative requirements for continued affordability and other reporting and that sort of thing.
But I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
But I also just want to add that if you do have a revolving loan fund and you are putting money into that, that doesn't mean you lose the 10% admin you get to take from that, you know, the capacity from that income that you've earned. So
that's true.
You know, if you have a different program that's doing something else, you can use that capacity towards the program income you earned on that side. So.
Yeah, we're still ironing out some of these things. Actually, we had to postpone a meeting today, and we might have learned a little bit more. But some of these details are going to be, you know, be getting ironed out as we go along. But yeah, I think, I mean, you know, you have that money, you know, you have that capacity to use up to 10%. The other thing I would say, though, is that a lot of folks that I've seen tend to think that they should be paying for some or all of their project costs, we call activity delivery costs, through the 10% general administration, and those costs are eligible as program costs, line item costs. So your people that are doing the taking applications for home purchases, or doing housing counseling, or doing rehab inspections, or writing up loan packages, all that stuff is directly related to the project, is directly attributable to the project, and therefore does not have to come out of your general administrative line item. And so if you have been assigning a lot of those costs to general admin, you might want to go back and kind of back them out and give yourself some general administrative costs or program administrative cost capacity. But I could see a program income and beyond the line webinar coming up here in our future.
Well, I don't see any other questions, so Jennifer, back to you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mary. We're going to move on and talk about post-closeout considerations, and we've got 3 topics today: program income, land banks, and reporting. We're going to start with program income. One of the big questions we got on other webinars and in general was, what would happen with my program income once I do closeout? HUD will not take back program income at closeout, but will continue to work with grantees to avoid disrupting the flow of program income throughout the closeout process. Grantees can continue to use the income in compliance with NSP rules and may earn additional program income after closeout, in fact. That program income needs to be reported annually. So basically what this means is that new construction and land banks, which is not eligible in CDBG, will continue to be eligible uses of the program income following closeout. Another post-closeout considerations for program income. Beneficiaries must continue to include households with incomes up to 120% AMI. And program income will be tracked on the same cycle as CDBG consolidated plan for those who are entitlement grantees. So this should simplify the planning process for those grantees. Other requirements for the use of program income are going to vary after closeout depending on what type of grantee you are. And so let's start talking a little bit about that. There are essentially 2 categories of grantees when we're talking about post-closeout program income considerations. We'll call this one Category 1. So in Category 1, we've got NSP1 and NSP3 state and entitlement grantees, also NSP2 state and entitlement grantees who are members of an NSP2 consortium subject to a consortium funding agreement, and also NSP3 non-entitlements with open CDBG grants. So if you're one of these 4 types of grantees, then you will be subject to the following program income rules. The income generated for the duration of the NSP program is considered program income and must be used for NSP eligible activities that meet a national objective. So that's true before closeout and after closeout. There are some thresholds, however, to keep in mind. If you've generated less than $25,000 of program income per year following closeout, you can use those funds for administration or include them in other CDBG activities. If the amount exceeds $25,000, however, you will have to use them for NSP eligible activities that meet a national objective. Now, if you start generating a lot of program income and your program income exceeds $250,000 per year, you're going to have to meet the 25% set-aside requirement. And that applies to all of the dollars you earn. So say you earn $260,000 a year in program income, the 25% set-aside requirement would apply to the entire $260,000, not just that $10,000 that you earned over the $250,000. So the next category for post-closeout program income considerations is Category 2, and it includes NSP3 non-entitlement grantees with no open CDBG grant at closeout, as well as NSP2 consortium nonprofit lead agencies or members and NSP2 nonprofit direct grantees. So the rules for these entities are a little bit different. For any, the income received prior to closeout must meet all of the general NSP requirements. However, following closeout, it's a little bit different. For the first 5 years after closeout, you'll have to use the funds for NSP eligible activities that meet a national objective. However, other cross-cutting requirements such as Davis-Bacon and environmental do not apply. And that's during the first 5 years after closeout. Following those first 5 years, any income generated will be considered miscellaneous revenue and no longer subject to the requirement that it be used for NSP eligible use. So although these funds are not subject to the ongoing NSP or CDBG program requirements after those first 5 years, that does encourage nonprofit grantees to use the funds for those same kinds of activities. Figure 6 in the closeout guide actually summarizes all these requirements in a nice little table, and it looks like this. It's hard to read here in this slide. We want to give you a sense of it, and you can take a look at it in the closeout guide, figure 6. So the next topic is land banks, and I'm going to turn it back over to Mary. Or actually, do we want to take some questions on program income? What do folks think?
Sure.
Okay. I don't see any in here. We didn't get any new questions in. If there are any questions on program income at this time, we can take them now.
I have a couple questions in the chat, Jennifer.
Okay.
So John asked, when you said $25,000 per year, are you meaning calendar year or some other period?
The year will be will fall around your standard sort of con plan reporting year, and so that might mean that the first year may be an abbreviated year, but in the future then it will start with the standard
CDBG.
Yeah, CDBG program year.
So that lets you budget, for, plan for it and kind of budget with all your programs. So hopefully it will make it more useful.
Great, thanks. So Don asked, is it correct that there's no requirement for a 25% set aside if the program income is less than $250,000 per year?
That's right. The idea there is that, if you have to spend 25% of 250, that's $62,500. We figured that was probably the sort of the least amount that you could actually do something with. Anything less than that really would kind of put you in sort of require you to do something that wasn't feasible. And I'm sure that in some markets, 62,000 isn't all that great either, but that's the philosophy there.
And remember, if you earn $250,000 in $1, you have now crossed the threshold. So it's 25% of all of the money, not just that $1.
Well, 25 cents? Oh.
Yeah, right.
We have a couple of questions from NSP2 folks. The first one came at the end of the last section, actually. And Teresa asked, they've accumulated long-term reserves for their NSP2 rental units. Will they have to spend those reserves before they close out?
No. If they're, legitimately, they should be in some sort of a trust agreement or something like that, and that, you arrived at these figures through some reasonable form of underwriting, then essentially those are spoken for because you've anticipated that you're going to need that money over the years, and therefore it's expended as far as we're concerned.
The key, I think, is how those reserves play in with their line of credit, because to the extent that those reserves are now acting as program income and they're not able to tap into their line of credit, then closing out would jeopardize any money left in the line of credit. So they want to make sure that
and they should be drawing.
There is no money left in the line of credit that would be forfeited.
You may want to review that with a technical assistance provider and make sure that you've got a an arrangement that works and that will satisfy legal requirements and so forth.
Great. So the other question from an NSP2 nonprofit is, after the 5 years of post-closeout, will the money no longer have any CDBG restrictions?
You won't have any CDBG restrictions the day after closeout. You just have to do an eligible activity with a national objective. After 5 years, it's considered to be miscellaneous revenue and doesn't have any requirements, although, the reason we do this is that two reasons. One is that OMB doesn't treat nonprofits the same as units of government, and two, the nonprofits that are in this program are all mission-driven nonprofits, and so we expect them to continue to use it for program-related activities, not trips to the Caribbean.
And there's a question from the phone line.
Okay.
From the line of Dave Wolf.
Yes. Yes, I had a question. I think I heard that you can have monies remaining in your line of credit and admin and still go to closeout. You don't have to bring that down to zero. Is that correct?
I'm sorry. What you can have is capacity, but you're going to have your line of credit be at zero or close to zero to close out. So the way that you would be able to carry funds forward is through program income. That a combination of having program income or being able to, having program income for sure, and
program income on hand.
Yeah. And having capacity, having not used all the 10% so far. But no, you won't. We have to close out the line of credit as part of the closeout process. So there won't be anything. If there's anything left there, it will go away. So we'll try to get that down to zero with you.
Yeah, the biggest thing is that when we talk about closeout, we're often talking about things that will continue to happen before and after closeout. But the biggest thing that does stop is that line of credit. When we say closeout, that faucet is shut off. Right? So you want to try to get that down as much to zero as possible.
Yeah, I think we're going to, as I said earlier, I think we're going to need to have some additional training on this, and we are, not surprisingly, still realizing some questions that we don't know the answers to. So we try to get those to you as fast as we can, but a lot of times we don't. We can't figure them all out in advance. So we'll keep training on that so that you can have the best chance of carrying some funds forward. You will be able to carry program income past the closeout, but not line of credit.
I see one more question on program income issues from Sean. If we revise all our remaining admin funds to acquisition rehab for an amendment, then generate program income and fund the admin activity because we've got program income, do we have to do an amendment to fund the admin activity from program income?
No, I don't think so. I mean, what you just described is basically a budget revision, a budget correction. You're not doing a new activity. You're not doing a new location. You don't have new beneficiaries. So these kinds of changes are administrative and are not generally considered to be amendments. But you got the process down, which is that if you can cover yourself by programming some funds into projects and into line items and back some of that into general administrative costs or program administrative costs, and then have enough program income to make up for that, to cover that capacity, you can carry that forward.
But in any questions you have about whether something is or is not an amendment, you need to talk to your field office. They are the final yeah.
I don't see any additional questions.
We do actually have a couple more about PI here. I got one in the chat that said, can we put some PI in a RCL for admin?
Revolving loan fund? You can't, well, no. I mean, the revolving funds are for activities. But, I mean, you may be able to, if you've spent 100% of your grant amount and you've spent all your line of credit and you've gotten your projects complete and occupied, then you can still use the program income. You don't have to have it in a line of credit. It can be a balance that is allocated to admin. So I mean, I think there's going to be a way to do what you are thinking about. We're going to have to get some more specific instructions, but I think that there's going to be a way to do what you want to do, but it wouldn't be through having a revolving fund for admin.
Okay, and two more. I think these will be quick ones. So Leslie asked if, is it correct that none of the activities funded by program income have to have an environmental review?
Only if you're an NSP2 nonprofit.
For 5 years after closeout. And also remember, if I have $100,000 on hand at the day I close out, and I'm one of these NSP2 nonprofits, anything I do with that $100,000 on hand is going to need to do an environmental review and all the same rules that I had pre-closeout. The rules that follow the program income follow when you earn the program income, not when you spend the program income.
But in this situation we're talking about applies to a handful of lead grantees and a few consortium members in NSP2, and a couple of NSP3 non-entitlements. Almost everybody in the program is going to continue to have to treat NSP program income as if it were brand new NSP money with all the requirements and rules. So, if you're not a nonprofit from NSP2, I know it's a nice thing to dream about, and you can ask for it for Christmas, but Santa won't be delivering it.
All right, and the last one I see here is the $250,000 program income threshold combined calculation for NSP1 and 3?
No, it's
grant.
It's per grant. Right?
Yeah.
We're going to close them out separately. I'm going to track them separately, so that'll be a separate calculation.
Okay, well, let me pick up with land banks and talk about some of the post-closeout requirements. So what is a land bank? Governmental and nonprofit entities typically create these entities so that they can acquire, manage, maintain, and repurpose foreclosed properties. And we do know that a number of grantees have set these up so that they can put in the properties that they have acquired and don't currently have a use for. So we want to encourage you, if you are thinking of setting one up, to look at a lot of the materials that are out there and available so that you understand how they're to be used. Because it's not intended to be the permanent use of the property to sit in a land bank. As you can see in the next paragraph, it says, land banks may assemble and temporarily manage. As you know, there's a requirement that these properties be used within a 10-year time period, so we want to make you aware of that. So you've got a 10-year window to put together a plan to use these, understand how they may have an impact on the community, but they're not going to be in the land bank forever. So as part of your post-closeout requirements, you will have to identify all of your assets, and this includes a list of the real property that is being held in the land bank so that HUD is aware of what you have on hand. The properties must be moved within that 10-year time period. The clock starts the day that your closeout agreement is signed, so you will know this is day one and I've got 10 years to do this. The chart that is here is also in the NSP closeout guide, which means it's in bigger print. But we really did want you to be aware of what the post-closeout requirements are and the things that you need to do. And, it's some of the things I just said. Create that inventory so you know and HUD knows where the properties are. Think about creating a database so that you can manage these properties. Review your acquisition policy if you're going to continue to acquire properties and add them to your land bank. Develop a maintenance plan, absolutely key. How are you going to make sure that particularly if they're lots, if the grass is cut, properties are cleaned, how you've boarded and sealed properties and you maintain them. So, and how are you going to pay for it? None of this comes free, so you have to make sure that you have the money to actually take those kinds of actions. And a marketing plan. Most importantly, if you have properties and you've got to develop a scheme so that you can say to the local government, do you have a redevelopment plan for an area? Can you use these properties? Are these houses that are in your land bank in condition that you may be able to market some of them? So start segregating your properties, understand what you need to do to actually market them to the community.
Mary?
So, yes?
Mary, this is John. We have a webinar coming up in about a month on land banks, but one of the things that we've been developing are some policies about how to meet national objectives, and I just want to point out here that it's really going to pay for the land banks to maintain those properties in terms of meeting a national objective, thereby contributing to the appearance and safety of the neighborhood and so forth. So I just wanted to throw that in, and also a plug for our the people who have land banks. I know there are not a lot of sort of land banks by name, but there's a lot of municipalities which are going to be acting as land banks, and so if you have a situation like that, tune in next month.
Do you have a specific date yet?
I think it's June 3rd, but we're not positive. It's been moving around a little bit.
Well, it's good to know there's going to be more on this. Because clearly the grantees have a lot to think about when the closeout's happening, and one of those things is, what am I going to do with all my properties 10 years down the road? So when you go to put this plan together, remember, other than we know that you're going to be able to quantify them, what's the realistic strategy? I mean, is it that the properties that you did buy are not marketable? If they're not, what can you realistically do with them? So think about that. And how long it's going to take to do it. As we all know, everything takes longer than we think it does. So if you think that you can do all this in 3 years, be realistic about how tough it may be to market in some neighborhoods, the difficulties of finding the families that are mortgageable to buy these properties. So realize that it may take quite a bit of time to actually do it. 10 years is a lot of time, but I hate to see everybody wake up in year 8 and say, oops, I got something to do. You can use NSP program income to acquire new properties added to the land bank, but still you have that 10-year restriction. If you still have properties sitting in your NSP land bank at the end of the 10th year, if you've got a CDBG program, that's where they're going, because you're not going to be able to keep that land bank up and operating with NSP-assisted funds. So think about that. Are they going to be able to meet the national objectives in the CDBG program? And one thing that you want to do, you do have to do an annual review. My suggestion is you don't wait every year to go drive by the properties, to drive by the lots, because by then you may have a pile of citations for uncut grass and litter on your property. So think about making it, if you have the time and the ability to do it, maybe even a quarterly review of all your properties so that you know what's happening to them. The system, whether it's DRGR or IDIS, can show what's happened to the properties. So remember that you'll have to fill the data in the system, and it's important to keep HUD up to date on where you stand with the property. And here's a little note. I think John and Hunter have already said it. You can't draw down funds from your line of credit prior to closeout and reserve them to manage your land bank. So think about how you're going to fund it over time. There are resources other than the June 3rd possible date for the next webinar in land banks. There are resources already available through the One CPD portal, and there is language currently in the closeout guide on some land bank issues. So we want you to be aware of all these and think about what you're going to be doing. Oops, I've started into Jennifer's part of reporting, so let me stop here and ask if there are questions on land banks.
You have a couple of questions on land banks, Mary. The first one is similar to that point you just covered about not being able to stock land bank or use money now for land bank admin later. But this one is a little different on that. If you have a land bank activity under NSP3, can you use admin funds to hire consultants to help write grants for redevelopment of the neighborhood surrounding the land bank site?
Yeah, I'll see why not. I mean, that's part of your disposition program. Yeah, I think that would be a legitimate expense.
Great. And the second question is from Paul, and he asks, their regional sewer district has a consent decree with the EPA that requires it to reduce combined sewer overflows by creating rainwater retention sites to reduce the flow of stormwater into the sewer system. Is that an okay land bank use?
Well, possibly. I mean, you probably can't do the construction of that, but I think you probably could make the land available for a public improvement that meets a national objective, as long as the construction money itself is another source of funds. Although even in NSP1, it might be able to do some of the construction as well. Yeah, I think I mean, I would expect to see some, at least retention ponds and those kinds of things. Cleveland's done Cleveland and Cuyahoga County have a great series of ideas for use of vacant parcels, and I've pitched this before, but I'll pitch it again. It's called Reimagining Cleveland. If you Google that, you get a great PDF of a book that they put together about a year or two ago that shows you how to do, and actually costs out a number of sort of small-scale improvements for vacant lots in residential areas.
Let's see if anybody's on the phone for questions.
If you would like to participate in the interactive question and answer session, please press star followed by the number 1 on your telephone keypad. You will hear a tone acknowledging your request and a prompt to record your name. Please remember to record your name so your question will be taken in the queue.
We just got one more written question from Susan. She asked, does program income have to follow its original NSP rules? So, for instance, program income from NSP1 to be used within NSP1 target areas and NSP3 to be used within NSP3 target areas.
Yes, it does, but you can amend your action plan, obviously, to
change your target area.
Change your target area.
And we've done that quite a bit. I mean, as the problem has migrated around, grantees have been amending their borders. So, but our attorneys have advised us that the money has to stay in target areas, but target areas can be adjusted. So, and you can use the new. You actually have to use the new NSP3 mapping tool, which is easier to use.
We'll be talking about that in just a second here, too.
Right.
So the second part of that question was if they want to combine program income from NSP1 and 3, they could do that, but it would require an amendment, correct?
It depends. I mean, if they've already, if the target areas are the same and the same activities are already in NSP1 and 3, I mean, you don't have to amend to use the same funding on the same project. You just need to amend to make sure you can do the same activities in the same place on the same project.
Right. Well, we've had all along grantees that are using NSP2 or 3 money to treat NSP1 properties that are in the same or overlapping target areas, and that's been fine, and the same principle applies to program income.
And just remember, when reporting, you just need to report in both grants the address and what you did separately.
And it won't be duplicated. We won't count it. We take out the duplicates, so based on the addresses. So this is good. I mean, we're really happy when we get a lot of questions like this. It shows that people are tracking this, and it helps us to see what sorts of things that we still need to figure out. So we appreciate your patience as we do not know everything, but we try to get answers for you as quickly as possible. So
speak for yourself, John. Speak for yourself.
He's sissy.
So Jennifer, post-closeout reporting.
Yes. So post-closeout reporting, as we've mentioned, all grantees will need to report annually following closeout. Essentially, there are 3 areas where grantees will be reporting. The first is on the status of activities that were funded with program income but that were open as of the date of closeout. You'll remember that the first criteria of closeout is making sure that you spent out your line of credit and that any activity funded with even 1 penny of line of credit funds is complete and has met a national objective. However, if you have some activities that are funded solely with program income, those activities do not need to be complete prior to closeout. Now, eventually you will have to meet the national objective for those activities that were funded solely with program income but still open at closeout. And so that's the reason that you'll need to continue reporting on those following closeout in your annual reports. The second kind of reporting relates to receipts of program income that you've earned following closeout. And then grantees will also need to report on affordability information. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. So the reporting requirements will be a little bit different depending on whether you're an entitlement and state grantee or a nonprofit and non-entitlement grantee. For nonprofits and non-entitlement communities, as we mentioned, you'll have to report on program income for just 5 years following closeout. However, you will need to report on affordability for the length of the affordability period. So the program income reporting is just 5 years, but you will have to keep reporting annually for the affordability period for all your projects. For entitlement and state grantees, they'll report on the same cycle as their consolidated plan. We've mentioned that before. Entitlement grantees will eventually be transitioned to IDIS once the system is adapted for NSP, and until that happens, you'll continue using DRGR. And then non-entitlements, nonprofits, they'll continue to use DRGR because they do not have access to IDIS. And guidance on these reporting issues will be issued separately once the system transition starts to take place.
Jennifer?
Yes.
Just real quickly, we want to point out that's probably going to be a little bit of a ways off before we switch over to IDIS.
Don't, years.
Yeah, don't, for those of you out there who are like, I know nothing about IDIS, don't sweat that. It will be a while before we make that transition.
Okay, good to know. So we want to talk a little bit more about the reporting on the affordability period. As part of the closeout, grantees will need to complete a management plan for continued affordability, and this is a template that's included in the closeout guide. It's at Appendix G, and there's some information that needs to be reported on that template, on that form, as part of the closeout process. Grantees can use an Excel spreadsheet in lieu of the form if that's easier, but it has to include all the required information. And that information is the address of each property, the applicable related responsible organization, the DRGR activity number, the date of the start of the affordability period, and the date of the end of the affordability period for each property. And just as a reminder, the date...
Sorry to interrupt again. Can we
yes,
back
go ahead.
quickly to the last slide?
Yes.
Two things about it. One of the reasons we're allowing you to do a spreadsheet rather than having to fill out the form is that you can actually download, or you're going to be able to pull a report from DRGR that will have all that information in it and just submit that rather than having to type in all of this stuff. The other thing is you will also be able to, vice versa, upload a lot of the information into DRGR. In that case, it's going to be a little more difficult, and there's going to be a lot more information you have to fill out, but still, it is doable. And we are in the production of a number of short little videos about each one of the forms that we're filling out, and this form will definitely have a video, and we'll talk about how to do some of that stuff on there.
Great. That'll be great. Okay. The start of the affordability period that you'll need to report on those forms, we just want to sort of recap what that means for different kinds of programs. For homebuyer programs, the affordability period begins on the date of purchase and loan closing. This is generally the same date, but keep in mind this is the date that the homeowner purchases the home, not the date that the grantee purchased the property. And for multifamily rental projects, the affordability period would begin when the project reaches stabilized occupancy. This is sometimes called break even, and it's generally when the property reaches about 80 to 90% occupancy. So in order to track all of this information, grantees need a system for ensuring that the NSP-assisted homes will continue to be the principal residence of eligible beneficiaries. And then for rental properties, those units must continue to be made available to income-eligible residents for the duration of the affordability period. So keep in mind here that there is no annual income certification as there is, for instance, in the home program. The grantee should have some internal policies and procedures in place for monitoring affordability of all units so that when it comes time for reporting on the annual cycle, you'll have that information available. And of course, with turnover in staff and the programs, having these policies and procedures in place up front is a good idea so that it's clear what the expectations are over time. So, do we have any questions on reporting, Kathy?
There's one written one here, Jennifer, from Naira. When you refer to closeout of activities funded with line of credit funds, does this refer to activities such as an rehab activity, or does activities, in quotes, refer to individual units and properties?
I missed a word right at the beginning of that. So are you talking about how you set up a revolving loan fund by activity?
No, they're asking about reporting. When you refer to the closeout of activities funded with line of credit funds, does this refer to activities such as an rehab activity, or does activities refer to the individual properties?
We're talking about addresses.
Yeah. So
are we referring to a slide that we had back there?
I think it's just a question.
I think it's just a question.
Yeah.
I think they might be talking about in DRGR, you set up an activity. It may have multiple addresses under that activity. That's an activity in DRGR. I think they're wondering if activity might mean the individual unit and property addresses.
Well, we're to the individual unit.
Yeah, for continued affordability, definitely.
And for line of credit funds, I mean, yeah, we need to, if a unit has $1 or a penny of line of credit funds in it, then it needs to meet a national objective before we can close out the grant.
Right, right. Yeah, so we shouldn't be referencing activity. We should be saying the unit.
Okay. Next question. Will there be a guide on what information will need to be reported on affordability?
We're working on it.
Well,
okay.
Well, it's not that much. I mean, what we're really looking for is that somebody's paying attention to each unit, and that that you're tracking whether the affordability period is over, And so the slide that Jennifer just showed, it talks about the address of the property, the responsible organization, the beginning and end date of the affordability period. You know, it's not a vast amount of information.
Related to this, Hunter, you mentioned there's a report in DRGR that would help with this, the information in Appendix G. Do you know which one that you were referring to?
I do not. I do
okay.
not. I would recommend looking out for the video that will be coming out shortly.
Starring Ryan Flannery.
Not starring me, starring Ryan Flannery. So probably, maybe starring both of us on this very this report. I do know that we are working on on developing a report that will show by activity whether or not there's line of credit funds in it, that activity or not. So to a certain extent, we are, you know, we do need to have an activity. This is actually an interesting question that we might have to ponder a little more.
One thing I wanted to address, going back to this issue of the managing the affordability period post-closeout. It may appear to us to be pretty straightforward, but I don't think we've received a lot of questions around challenges that grantees are having dealing with the affordability period yet. So I've gotten a proposal from a provider asking, you know, for additional guidance on this, but I would like to see other questions and challenges that grantees are dealing with around the affordability period, just to see how much explanation and guidance is needed relative to the issue.
We have one more written question. For closeout purposes, how do we determine if an activity or a particular home was funded with program income or line of credit?
We're developing a report.
Wait for the video.
DRGR.
Yeah, it's still in development, but we're working on getting you something that will allow you to see that.
I think there may be another question here. The numbers went up. There is. Do you recommend we create a new DRGR activity number as opposed to using an existing activity number when using program income dollars?
We're not requiring that, but if you are now working on a project that is only going to have program income and no line of credit funds, I personally would do that because I think it's going to make my life easier. But there's no requirement that you do that. It's just going to be a lot more untangling later on.
We have questions from the phone line.
Wait, can I just back up one thing for that? That's another, when you're working with your administrative funds, that's something else to consider. If you're now at a point where you are zero line of credit funds, you may want to start a new admin line and close out that old admin line new in DRGR, because that way, you don't have to worry about that in the future. And it's sort of the same activity. But I'm sorry, please, let's hear that question.
First question is from the line of Al Cooper.
Hello.
Hi, it's actually Hal Cooper, but anyway, in terms of the post-closeout reporting, you have said that it's going to be on an annual schedule aligned with the CAPER. Does that mean we'll have 90 days to submit the report, or will it still be 30 days like it is now?
You mean after the deadline? You're saying within 30 days of that deadline, or within 90 days following?
Right now, after the end of each quarter, we have to report within 30 days of the end of the quarter. So when we're on annual reporting, does that mean we will have 90 days like we do for the CAPER, or will we still have 30 days after the end of the year to report on NSP?
unfortunately, it's going to be the 30 and for NSP2 the 10. But
because that's the only place that days are referenced.
Yeah, but that's an interesting question that I think we need to confer and make sure that is correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been thinking about aligning it with the CAPER and the con plan in terms of the budget, but we haven't really, I don't think we focused on it from the reporting side, so let us try to get a good answer for that.
Thank you.
Your next question is from the line of Tipsil Colonnay.
Hello, this is Ketsia Colonnay from the City of Chicago. I have a question related to reporting that stemmed from a question and response from the last webinar. So as it relates to reporting beneficiary data, if there is an activity where grants were used to purchase a property, let's say with NSP1, and rehab the property with NSP2, where do you report the beneficiary information? Is it under NSP2 where the property was rehabbed? And my next question is similar.
Both. You want to report in both.
You want to report in both, so you'll do the deduping.
In order to serve that beneficiary.
Right, and Ketsia, we'll take those apart and drop the duplicates out using addresses. So it sounds duplicative, but it won't be.
Okay, so that same theory would apply if within one grant, let's say NSP2, funds are using one address or one address has expenditures in two eligible uses, so eligible use B and eligible use A. We will still report in both uses, and then you all would dedupe?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Well, sounds like we ought to move on to NSP2 and 3 grant requirements. Jennifer, if you want to throw me the ball.
Sure, and there was one more question, I think, in the question and answer. This is from Brad. He asked, can we require annual income certifications for occupants of rental properties?
We do not require annual income certifications.
Yeah, we're going to get to that, but no. That's one of those.
That's a home requirement, but it's never been a requirement in CDBG.
We only picked up a number of the rental requirements from home, and some of them, and that was one that we did not.
But what that does mean is that if somebody moves out and the new person moves in during the affordability period, that new person must meet the income requirements at that time. But it does not mean that you have to then ask the same person yearly to demonstrate their income.
Yeah, just at the time of occupancy.
Yeah.
Can they do that if they'd like to include that as part of their program?
They can always go above and beyond our base level rules.
Right. I mean, home does that, and we have a different philosophy from home in that we are trying not to hold it against people for improving their economic conditions, but because in the home program you might have to pay a higher rent or something like that, so we don't do that. But you may.
Okay, great.
Okay. Any other questions before I move on?
There are no other questions from the phone line.
Thank you. So now we're going to talk about some of the particular NSP2 and 3 grantee requirements. And specifically, some of the things we want to point out, as many of you know, who are NSP2 and NSP3 grantees, that particularly in NSP2, there was a unit performance measure. When you applied for funding, you told HUD how many units of acquisition, rehab, new construction, whatever it was, you gave them numbers that were considered as part of your application. You told HUD what your target areas were, and the requirement was that you be working in those target areas. And of course, as we all know, there are restrictions on the amount of money to be spent on NSP2 and 3, and both of those grants also included green and energy efficiency requirements. So, HUD's requirement in NSP2 was either return a minimum of 100 abandoned or foreclosed homes back to productive use, or otherwise eliminate and mitigate negative effects in the community. Unless you have already talked to your regional HUD rep or worked it out with headquarters that those numbers that you originally put in your plan, you have to meet those guidelines. You have to meet those numbers before closeout. Or explain to HUD why you couldn't meet this. So if you are an NSP2 grantee, I would suggest that you be talking to HUD about those issues. NSP2 action areas. Once again, I know that a number of grantees have changed some of their target areas over the last couple of years, either because there were lack of units or high-cost units in the area. So once again, you must demonstrate that you did or did not work in those areas. And this is one area where you should be talking to your local HUD rep or the person handling the NSP2 grant and talking about amending the plan so that you come into conformance with what you said you were going to do and now may not be able to do. And once again, there was an NSP policy alert put out on this, and actually just a couple of weeks ago. So if you have more questions, take a look at that and it'll give you some ideas. So these previous foreclosure maps are outdated and may no longer reflect. The good news is many of the markets have started to recover. So if you are going to add new census tracts, you have to go in to the tool and look at the areas and now see what they're rated. So we suggest this is also one where keeping in close contact with HUD on these changes is important. But if you're not meeting the targeting, whether you're NSP2 or an NSP3 grantee, talk to HUD, talk about what the issues are so that they're aware of what may happen, because as you go to close out your program, these issues are going to pop up, most assuredly. The mapping capabilities, as we know, over time have gotten much better. So you have the ability to draw some interesting boundaries. So go into the tool, take a look, see if it helps you, show that you can meet these, or once again, go back and talk to your HUD rep and say, look, we've done it in these areas, can we move it, can we increase it, but realize that before you go to closeout, you've got to address these issues. So remember that if you're an NSP2 grantee, you were scored on having a target geography where the need, as you remember, was an average of 17. So, I'm sorry, not an average, but the sites were not less than 17 in the mapping tool. So if it has become a consideration that you're now a couple of years down the road, you've bought up all the bad properties and then created a market where other properties are being rehabbed and you're not finding any properties, go back and talk to HUD about it. So here's the link on the mapping. So if you're running into issues, these are the kinds of things that you should be talking to folks about now, because when you go and say, oh, I'm ready to close out, and somebody does a review of your documents and says, whoa, 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 you haven't met all these targeted requirements. Now it's time to start addressing those and see what you can do to bring yourself into conformity, because it's going to take some time. As you know, the mapping tool really gave you a heads up on what was there. So we encourage you to go back. As we said, it has improved over time. It will email you back in 24 hours, pretty good turnaround. So you have a sense of what's out there. Am I going to have a problem if I don't continue to work in my areas, or do I need to add new areas that have a better selection of units? And now's the time to think about it, because if you do want to close out sometime in the next year or so, you're going to have to know that all of this data is correct. If you're going to have to end up doing an amendment to your action plan, keep the response you get back from HUD on the mapping, because it's important. It's part of this mission, gives both the public and HUD an opportunity to understand why you picked those areas, what's in the area, and how does it conform to the NSP requirement. So another thing that was added as special considerations, and I'm pleased to say I see many people in NSP 2 and 3 have done this, the green and the energy efficiency requirements. As folks were rehabbing and or building new units, they added a lot of features that have made these units less expensive to operate, which of course is a great benefit to the families. And hey, we're saving the environment. So as you know, in DRGR, it asks those questions. You know, what did you do to meet this? And, you know, how many low-flow toilets and how many other things did you add to your properties that made them meet these requirements? So you've got to show that you've demonstrated compliance with those requirements. And if you want to understand where they came from, it was an absolute requirement in NSP2 and was also in the 2010 Unified Notice for NSP1 and 3 that talked about what all those requirements were. Another consideration, one thing that you'll have to take a hard look at now that you've gotten through a lot of your expenditures in NSP2 and 3, there was a restriction that you could not spend more than 10% of your grants on demolition. If you knew that you were going to do that or had a plan that said you wanted to spend more than 10, have you gone to HUD? Have you gotten a waiver and an approval of that waiver so that you know that you're in conformance even if you are over the 10%? We hope you've kept your correspondence. It may come up throughout the closeout process that were these things documented and you have them in your files so that there's no questions. So there are a couple more slides, really just talking about state grantees. We do understand that the state grantees are very different from the local entitlements and the nonprofits. And in particular, on the closeout issue, I know from some of the past webinars, we've gotten questions from state-funded grantees about different items. HUD will be working with the state because those are the grantees, not with the individual subrecipients funded by the state. So this is really intended for the state to gather all together all of the necessary documentation to show that they've met the closeout requirements. Subrecipients should be talking to their states about this closeout issue, issues on program income, all those things. But the guidance for the subrecipients will be coming from the states, and look at your subrecipient agreement. It will tell you what the state policies are, particularly issues of program income. Who's handling it? Is it going back to the states? How will the state reallocate the money if there is program income? And we suggest if you do have those questions, call your state, ask those questions. Program income is aggregated at the state level, even if the individual subrecipients are keeping it, and follows that $25,000 rule. So these are all of the slides for today. So in addition to slides on the section I just covered on NSP2 and 3 particular requirements, feel free to ask questions about anything that was in the webinar.
So we do have a question, Mary, from Sheila. She says that we are in the midst of deleting census tracts that we did not do work in. I saw the policy alert on census tracts, but when subtracting census tracts, are we using the old or new tool? And she's an NSP2 grantee.
You have to use the new tool regardless of whether you're adding or subtracting. You know, Jennifer Hilton on our staff had spelled that out in the policy alert that we just mentioned here, and it can get a little bit tricky because you're going to have to, almost everybody's got multiple areas that you have to average, and so it's a little more complicated than we could get into here. It's not that bad, but it's just, you know, it's basically sort of balancing two different sets of data. But so far, we've approved some amendments like that, right? So, I mean, it's one, okay. So it's possible.
Yeah, and you know, and as always, we'll work with the grantees on their amendments here at headquarters to make sure we can get everything to work. So.
But, you know, I think one of the things we'd like to point out again, knowing that it's going to take some time. If you're thinking of closing out your NSP2 grant in particular right now, think about going through that process of amending and subtracting and deleting census tracts now, rather than when you've made the request to HUD to close out.
Yeah, if you've made the request to close out and you're filling out the paperwork and work with the field office and you haven't amended, you are too far ahead. You got to back off and stop, and the amendment process should be one of the first things you do.
Okay. Let's see. We have some other questions here. Do we have anything on the phone line?
We have no questions on the phone line.
Really quiet group.
Well, I think just the opposite is what John and I are thinking. We got to talk to them. Yeah.
We do have one question here. This is from Wendren. The question is, we just added several new census tracts due to working with MTW. We're an NSP2 grantee. We have worked in all of the original census tracts, but since we just added so many more, will it be held against us that we haven't worked in all of the new tracts?
Yeah, there are no new and old tracts. We look at it as, these are the tracts I'm now saying I'm working in. So you're going to have to remove the tracts that you did not work in. Because you got to remember, you're basically, when you come and amend your action plan, we're rescoring your plan, and so what you have is your current sort of world that we're looking at. So I don't know if I'm explaining that very well, but it's kind of an abstract.
So your target area continues to be your target area, but we won't penalize you if you found that you added more area than you wanted to. You can back some of that out or subtract it, as it were.
Ooh.
Well, don't call it subtraction for nothing.
Yeah.
There's no more questions in the queue.
And there are no questions on the phone lines?
Great.
Jeez.
Thank you all.
We know you have a couple questions out there.
Oh, we did get an answer to the question earlier about the reporting. When you go to the annual reporting, you are going to be required to report in the same time period that you currently are. So for 1 and 3, they will need to submit their annual report 30 days after the end of the year, the end of the reporting year. And for NSP2, it will be 10 days after the end of the reporting year.
But hopefully it's not going to be that much activity to report on, but and you could start early. So.
Yeah, you have a whole year to get ready.
All right. Well, the sun has come back out in your nation's capital, so we hope that the rains have lifted in your neighborhoods, and we'll be back with a DRGR webinar, and then
well, next week we have a webinar on monitoring, the new monitoring tool that we've put together, and then our next sort of closeout related webinar will be about preparing QPRs for closeout, and that will be on the 20th of May, if I'm correct.
And we did get one more question in, actually.
Oh, too late.
Too late?
I'll stick around for it. Hunter, you can go to sleep again.
The question asks, how will creating another admin activity prevent recapture during closeout?
It won't. You're not in danger of recapture. It's just going to make it easier for you to sort of keep it straight, I think.
Right. What I was referring to is that if you've already drawn down all of your line of credit, you may want to consider closing out your admin and opening a new admin activity line, because it's just going to be easier for reporting. It will not really affect recapture. if you still have line of credit funds, then there's no reason to do that because you may end up spending admin in that line of credit. What we're doing, the report we're building right now is going to show every activity and whether or not there's any money spent from the line of credit in that activity and whether or not you've closed that activity. And that will help us determine who's ready to close out. So that's why I was saying that if you've drawn all your line of credit, you probably want to consider closing out that admin activity and opening it up again so that's only program income. So then when we pull the report, it won't show that you have an activity that's open with line of credit funds. It will show a closed activity with line of credit funds.
Right. And then also, you know, we talked about, and a couple of people asked questions about the activity delivery costs, the project management kind of fees versus the general administrative or program administrative costs. And there is a policy alert that we put out, and CBG has basically adopted the same thing. I was just looking for the date. I think it was around 2012. But if you look in the policy alerts, the NSP policy alerts on one CPD, you'll find that. So if you're looking to, you know, sort of understand how you might reallocate your activity delivery costs back to the program, the project lines, rather than into your general administrative funds, that should give you a pretty good set of instructions on how to do that.
Okay, we got one more question in. The question is, for Category 2 NSP2 grantees, does NSP eligible activities mean they are required to be in already identified census tracts, or does it open up the area limitations as long as they follow NSP rules? And that's just talking about after closeout.
So after closeout, yeah, we're going to be issuing some guidance on this here in the near future, but in general, yeah, you're going to be able to work pretty much anywhere you want as long as you have some sort of targeting strategy. And we'll explain all this a lot more in the very near future. I assume this is during that 5-year window where there are no requirements.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. I guess we're just going to encourage you to have a strategy.
Okay, that's the last one we've got.
All right. Well, good luck out there closing out your NSP grants, everyone.
Did you tell them that we're running some suckers? I mean, some
pilots.
We have a couple of volunteer grantees to go through the system and you know, make sure that it's relatively smooth so that everybody else will have an easier time. And that reminds me, I wanted to thank again our reviewers who reviewed the closeout guide, and also Hunter Kurtz here and Jennifer Alpha, who really did a huge percentage of the work on this thing, and I think it's a really good document. And Hunter's even got a video on how to fill out the forms now, so we're going multimedia on you.
Not yet. Soon.
Well,
it'll be released soon.
Well,
it'll be a preview. Yet. Right, exactly. You need to say like your best announcer, so it's coming soon.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
This concludes today's conference call. Thank you for your participation. At this time, you may now disconnect. Presenters, please hold.